Well, introducing John Muth is a real challenge. I've known John for several years, and I felt like I could just talk about him. And then I looked at his more complete biography, and I thought, no, I can't just talk about John. I really need to do a formal introduction. I knew it would be a privilege, but I'm really impressed with how great a privilege it is to speak about John and his good works. John has done so much important work and held so many significant positions and earned so many honors that introducing him is a real challenge. He is, of course, partner at Miller Johnson, the law firm Miller Johnson here in Grand Rapids, practicing civil litigation, environmental law, and doing a great deal of arbitration and mediation. I know him to be a very effective mediator, in fact, from personal experience. He was the president of the State Bar of Michigan, making him for a time the most distinguished among Michigan's 38,000 lawyers. He's a fellow of the American Bar Foundation and Michigan State Bar Foundation. Named by one organization as a super lawyer, I thought that was an interesting appellation and an appropriate one. He is on everybody's list of top lawyers, whether top 10, top 50, top 100. You'll see John's name there. But it isn't just prominence that marks John, it is service. The State Bar of Michigan gave him the Roberts P. Hudson Award, which is the highest honor a Michigan lawyer can earn for service to the public and the profession. That's how much John has meant to the legal community in Michigan. But if it's possible, he has meant even more to the people of Grand Rapids, and I'd say especially the poorest people of Grand Rapids. You see, it was about 10 years ago that John envisioned the Legal Assistance Center, what we now know as the Center, a collaborative venture today between Cooley Law School, the Grand Rapids Bar, Kent County, and other organizations and supporters. That center now serves 1,000 patrons every month, 12,000 a year, right here in the courthouse in Grand Rapids. John chaired the committees that formed and then guided the center over the past several years. It was through John's efforts that the center received the largest grant ever given by the Michigan State Bar Foundation, I think by multiples, and also that the center established and funded an endowment. I can easily say that if it were not for John Muth, there would be 1,000 examples every month of needy people who could not find access to justice right here in Grand Rapids, really proving that there is a passionate encounter with the cruelty of the world at the heart of John's experience. Grand Rapids has several very distinguished lawyers. In fact, you might have noticed that it just buried one of them along the banks of the Grand River. John, too, is unquestionably a diamond among us, a lawyer's lawyer. Please welcome John Muth to Cooley's Grand Rapids campus.
Well, thank you very much, Nelson, for that overly generous introduction. My father would have loved it. My mother might have believed it. Let me talk to you a bit today about a personal journey. First of all, I do want to thank you and thank Cooley and Nelson and everyone for the opportunity to be with you today and talk to you about this. Really what you're going to get is some personal reflections more than anything else. And while my general topic today is legal services for the poor, the context of that topic will be my personal journey in this area. And since I am relating my own experience, the word I is going to appear in this presentation a bit more often than I would otherwise be comfortable. But since my experience is only the context and it's not the message, it's really about you folks as well. One way of describing an individual life is as a collection of experiences. An experience can be an event, a journey, a relationship. It can be an action or a thought. It can be personal. It can be vicarious. We are all a collection of our own experiences. And a society, to the extent that it can be defined at all, is a collective experience. yours, mine, and everyone's. So as I describe my journey, please consider your own. I am not poor. I have never been poor. I didn't grow up around people who were. And although I have been financially independent since 21, and there have been some lean times, I could always get a job. Even when I shoveled cement, washed dishes, and cleaned toilets, and I did all of them, I never lacked a roof over my head or food on my table. I was never without an education. I always had 2 caring parents and a supportive extended family. So my involvement in legal services for the poor is really born of reflection and a philosophy that you use when you approach your life, rather than it is something born of my personal experience. Often in ways that we understand only in hindsight, our views are shaped by the experiences of our relationships. It's been my very, very good fortune to have benefited from the influence of 3 extraordinary people: my father and 2 mentors. I want to talk to you a bit about what each added to my life. Bob Muth was born in 1920 to a poor, recently immigrated family which settled in Kalamazoo, Michigan. In his formative years, his family of 5 children, headed by a father with little education and a propensity to drink, encountered the Depression. He didn't own clothing that was first his until he graduated from high school. The family moved often as a result of sequential evictions, and the whole extended family had to work to put food on the table. Fortunately, he was both a good student and a fine athlete. He graduated from high school near the top of his class and received a number of offers for scholarships to college. Football was his ticket to a higher education. After a bachelor's degree came a master's degree and the start of a long career in public education administration. A PhD and later a professorship at a major university followed. Throughout his career, his focus was upon assuring a quality public education for all, with emphasis on those who were most disadvantaged. One of my proudest moments as his oldest son was to accept for him, 2 weeks before his death in 1989, his election to the Michigan Education Hall of Fame. My dad taught me the responsibility that each of us bear for one another and the need for dedication and effort to tasks of importance. Michael Frank was born in Germany in 1932. He was a Jew, and for those of his faith, that was not a propitious time or place to come into the world. In the late 1930s, his family fled to Paris, where his father was later arrested, and where Mike and his mother fled again on the last train to leave before the occupation. They made their way to Morocco, where after the war they were rejoined by his father, who had miraculously escaped the camps of the Holocaust. The family later emigrated to New York, where Mike concluded his education at Columbia Law School. For 26 years before his death in 1994, Mike was the executive director of the State Bar of Michigan. He was one of the foremost legal ethicists in the country and was certainly on everyone's short list of the most respected lawyers in the state of Michigan. Remembering perhaps a packed coach at Gare de Lyons in Paris or the docks of Casablanca, Mike was a great, great champion of those left outside the promise of America. Reflecting perhaps the strength of family and friends driven across Europe, he was a peerless exemplar of law as a high calling. knowing perhaps that the full promise of America has not yet been achieved and that forces of divisiveness batter at the dream, Mike challenged the entire legal profession to muster the will and the courage to march in the vanguard of progress. Mike taught me to revere the law as a a principled and dignified profession. John Comiskey was born to a very wealthy family in Detroit in 1916. His father was a successful banker. The Depression changed everything. The bank failed. Family resources were exhausted honoring business obligations. Their home was foreclosed upon. His father became disconsolate. In 1933, his father took his own life. John was in 10th grade. Supported by older brothers and by his own work, John graduated from high school and later the University of Michigan and the University of Michigan Law School. John was a lifelong Republican, serving as finance chairman of many Jerry Ford campaigns. He was also a lifelong proponent of legal services for the poor. He served as chairman of the ABA Standing Committee on Legal Aid, served on the first National Advisory Committee on Legal Services for the OEO, was an important part of the creation of Legal Services Corporation in the early 1970s, and as president of the State Bar, as a member of the Board of Governors of the ABA, and as a longtime trustee and treasurer of the Michigan State Bar Foundation, he continued his commitment until his death in 2002. Long before his passing, the State Bar named its award for pro bono service, an award received by Cooley's own Nelson Miller, the Comiskey Award. When asked what a staunch Republican with a silk-stocking, management-oriented labor practice was doing as the foremost advocate for legal services for the poor, John responded, "The practice of law is a privilege. If the concept of the rule of law is to exist, it has to be available to everyone who needs it. It has to have the respect of everyone, whether they need it or not. And as a lawyer, I am a gatekeeper. I guard the door to justice, and that's a tremendous responsibility." John taught me that a nation's legal system is only as noble as the justice provided to the weakest of its citizens. By the middle 1990s, it was apparent that more and more individuals were representing themselves in court. The only Michigan study that I have seen was done in the late 1990s, and it revealed that from 50 to 90% of all cases filed in district courts were filed by people who did not have lawyers. In probate court, the percentage was 40 to 60%, and in circuit court, it was 20 to 40%. The variation from one end of the range to another was simply dependent upon the jurisdiction. Some courts had more than others. In fact, there was a district court in East Lansing where 98% of all the cases were filed by people without lawyers. Tells you that it's a university town, I suspect. Not only was pro se litigation, as it's called, a strain on the court and the staff, it's clear that the quality of representation that the people were providing to themselves left something to be desired. In 1994 and 1995, I had the privilege to serve as the president of the State Bar of Michigan. One of my responsibilities was to write a President's Page article for each issue of the Bar Journal. I took that responsibility as an opportunity to think about and express my own views on a number of issues that I believed were of importance to the profession and to the justice system. One article was entitled, "What About Maria?" And a part of that article read, "Maria Tolliver was in the battle of her life. At stake were visitation rights, with her young children. She appeared in court this day, attired in a form-fitting blouse and a leather miniskirt, her best outfit. As Maria approached the bench, she glanced nervously about the room, searching for her bearings, perhaps, or just looking for encouragement. She started to speak and then stopped, then started again, then stopped. As she gathered herself and started a third time, a torrent erupted. Facts, arguments, suspicions, emotions, and a smattering of law from the People's Court. To put it most kindly, the presentation was somewhat disorganized and a bit short of legal reasoning. Opposing counsel smiled knowingly, objecting just twice to her presentation, but each objection threw Maria's already rambling discourse into a spiraling tailspin, which it only slowly, painfully, but never completely recovered. Counsel responded with a smooth, succinct, reasoned argument, cited recent precedent, and referred subtly to the past practices of the judge. Maria was gathering her courage to launch a counterattack when the judge informed her that the hearing was over. She left in a daze, her feet treading several inches above the floor. 2 weeks later, Maria received the decision. She lost. The courts of every jurisdiction in Michigan are full of Marias. And what we have to ask ourselves, I believe, is can we honestly proclaim equal justice for all as a cornerstone of our democracy when only a small fraction of those eligible for free legal services receive them, when 80% of the legal needs of the poor and the working poor are not met, when 40% of the needs of the moderate income folks are not met, and where the overwhelming majority of Americans who are confronted by a legal problem respond to it by simply doing nothing and taking whatever consequences may come. Now, ideas take some time to form. Formed ideas must often await inspiration to compel some action. I knew about the problems of underrepresentation. I could speak about them. I could write about them. But I couldn't, in 1996, see clearly how I, as one person among what are now 38,000 lawyers in the state of Michigan, could do much about it. I left my presidency of the bar. I returned to my practice and my billing sheets, and I looked for other diversion. The first diversion I chose was a bicycle trip. I had enjoyed riding a bike for a number of years, had done it for exercise, had managed to ride 100 miles a day on a few occasions, but I had never taken a multi-day trip. To the dismay of my long-suffering wife, and for reasons murky at best and likely rooted in some repressed psychological disturbance from my youth, I decided to ride across the United States. The thought later hit me that I could use it as a fundraiser for legal aid. But little did I know when I cycled out of San Diego and into the coastal range that the connection between that trip and legal services for the poor would be far stronger than just the money raised. As the route wound to the east, we avoided metropolitan areas, seeking out rural and little-used roads. We cycled through small towns struggling to survive after the demise of the family farm, the closing of the mine, the play-out of the oil boom, and the flight of jobs to faraway places. We saw the face of poverty every day, be it Hispanic in the desert border towns, white in the hills of Arkansas, black in the pine forests of northern Mississippi. The towns passed by with names like El Centro, Tohoka, Brownfield, Juca, Batesburg. And as they did, a different America emerged than the one you and I see on television. It was the America left behind by the inexorable march to a global and information-based economy. On a back road in northern Mississippi, between Tupelo and Fulton, we cycled past a dwelling which housed a large family. The dwelling was a trailer, not a double wide with a screen porch. It was a freight trailer, well used and decrepit, propped up on bricks. The entry had been crudely cut on the side of the trailer with a torch. The living room was a bare patch of red clay, sharing space with several vehicles in various states of disassembly. At first, I saw no sign of activity. Then I saw her. She was about 6 or 7 years old with a beautiful face etched in fear. She was running toward the bicycle, screaming at us to get away. She was stark naked. I never saw her again, but I envision her often. She is in my mind now as I think back to events of 10 years ago. What was her life like? Why was she so afraid? Did she ever receive an education? Could she escape the terrible poverty of her birth? And that brief encounter was an epiphany of sorts to me. From that moment, the problem became my problem. I might, and probably couldn't, do anything to help that little girl. But I should be able to do something about a problem that I was familiar with in my own community. And in thinking about the resources in Grand Rapids, I knew that we had a strong legal aid organization. The Bar Association had its lawyers referral service. The Fair Housing Center and Migrant Legal Services offered assistance to folks. And many community agencies rendered human services. But there remained duplications and large gaps. And I was reminded of John Comiskey's dream, often expressed, of a seamless delivery of legal services to attend to the legal needs of those in our midst who are least fortunate. One morning, a number of months after the return from the bike trip, literally while standing in the shower, a triage model for legal services hit me. One place to go for legal advice for the poor and the near poor, indeed for anyone. It would include a referral network to community service agencies for people who really didn't need a lawyer, just had a human problem. It would include a screening for and referral to legal aid for people who were eligible. For those who were not and wanted a lawyer, we could sign them up with a lawyer referral service, give them a half hour of free legal advice and see if that would solve their problem for them. And for those who would choose to represent themselves in court, should that become necessary, help with forms and procedures, some education, some reassurance to help them on their way. Well, where to put it? A new Hall of Justice was just being designed. Perfect. What group to spearhead it? The Grand Rapids Bar Association was looking for a worthy project. Perfect. In October of 1998, I received an award from the State Bar, and the Grand Rapids Bar Association was kind enough to hold a reception. I was called upon to say something. I thanked everyone for coming, remarked that the award spoke nicely to the past, but that we all had it in us to do much more. I then explained the concept of what is now the Legal Assistance Center and said that we were all going to do it together. This came as a surprise to the president of the Grand Rapids Bar, who had never heard of the idea, and to the judges in attendance who didn't yet know they were going to be sharing their courthouse. But thankfully, as the surprise wore off, everyone enthusiastically got behind the concept. The Grand Rapids Bar Board unanimously supported the project and formed a committee to pursue it. The city commission and the county board directed the architect, after the building was fully designed, to find some way to put us in it. The two governments built out the space and provided it to us rent-free. The Grand Rapids Bar Foundation provided all its distributable income for 5 years to the project. The Michigan State Bar Foundation gave to it what was then and still is the largest single grant they've ever given to a project. The Grand Rapids Community Foundation, the Dyer Eyes Foundation, Fry Foundation, all provided support in one way or another. Legal aid came in as a full partner. Every single Grand Rapids law firm made a financial contribution. Many lawyers and every single Kent County judge made a financial contribution. Dozens of lawyers devoted thousands of hours. Altman and Weil, the national law firm consultants, heard about this somewhere, called and volunteered to donate their time to organize and conduct a 2-day conference called Future Search, where we brought together an array of community organizations to help identify needs and resources. Well over $1 million was raised for the startup and for the first 3 years of operation. And all this was done for a project that had never been done anywhere else, and where nothing even close had been done with private funding. And in February 2002, the Kent County Legal Assistance Center opened. The LAC now has a staff of 3 people with many volunteers operating out of the 5th floor of the Hall of Justice. Last year it saw well over 12,000 patrons. The largest portion of those were seeking assistance in domestic matters, but the entire array of legal needs are there to be dealt with at one time or another. Most are poor or working poor. From surveys of our patrons, we know that the reaction has been overwhelmingly positive. Judges and court staff alike rely heavily upon the LAC. When any staff or judge encounters a self-represented person, the first thing that person is told is go see the nice people on the 5th floor. They can help you. The staff has worked with the courts to simplify procedures, to develop forms so that our patrons can better understand their case and that the judges can better communicate with our patrons. On the organizational side, the LAC is now a standalone, not-for-profit corporation with a 21-person board made up of people from a variety of constituencies. The legal profession, the judges, the court staff, city and county government, and the community. The budget's now about $315,000 a year. The LAC over the last 4 years of operation has proven to be worthy of its aspirations and worthy of the confidence that so many people put into it. The challenge now is twofold: to expand a successful program and to ensure long-term financial stability. In just this last year, we have made major progress on those fronts, and I will mention 3 examples. The county is now supporting our operating budget with $40,000 this year and committed to go to a full third of our operating expenses next year. Secondly, Elizabeth Snell, a great friend of John Comiskey and a good friend to everyone at the Miller Johnson firm, passed away and left the LAC $1.5 million to jumpstart an endowment fund. And finally, Cooley Law School is joining us as a full partner, providing volunteer opportunities for students and combining resources for the clinical programs that are now being developed. We very, very much look forward to Cooley students being an active part of the service that we're providing. The LAC has come a long way from a thought to a vibrant reality. And that course is extended over what seemed to be 8 fairly short years. But there is more yet to be done. Ours is still the only program of its type in the state and perhaps in the nation. And 10 years from now, as we look out, we should envision a state network of LACs funded through a combination of private and public dollars, serving citizens in every single population in the state. And work is now getting underway to accomplish just that. Let me return, if I may, to the premise I stated at the outset. This is your story as much as it is mine. I have largely used the past tense, but we should all be thinking in the future tense. Maybe your chapter is yet to be written. Maybe your task is not yet defined. Maybe your idea has not yet been hatched. But opportunity always awaits commitment. Why you? Why you? Because, as Winston Churchill said, we have a living by what we get. We make a life by what we give. In my last article as bar president, I entitled it, "A Letter to My Son." Jeff was then about to begin law school, and I thought that Dad might say something about the career that lay ahead of him. A part of that article reads as follows. Knowing that a career in law or any other field is no guarantee of a meaningful life, it is important to think far beyond the degree, the bar exam, and the first job. You must think now about the kind of lawyer you wish to become. You must assess how that lawyer relates to the person you wish to be, the reputation you wish to enjoy, and the broader life you wish to lead. There is always room for another good lawyer. By that I mean a lawyer grounded in a sense of public service, rooted in ethical behavior, committed to civility, infused with the principles underpinning a lawyer's constructive role in society, determined to discharge his or her responsibilities with class, with integrity, desirous of melding life and law into a common, connected, purposeful destiny. If your goal is to become a good lawyer, the law can provide a wonderful, challenging, exciting, humane, invigorating, and deeply satisfying career. Great success can be achieved with or without great financial gain. Conversely, if a commitment to professionalism is lacking, economic success alone cannot stave off personal failure. Why now? Why now? I think my favorite Chinese proverb says it all. Man must sit in chair with mouth wide open for a very long time before roast duck fly in. Why bother? Why bother? The problems are large, they're many, and each of us is small and one. A simple story speaks to this question. A young boy was walking along the shore after a particularly violent storm. The beach was littered with thousands of starfish that had been washed ashore and were slowly dying. The boy approached an old man who was patiently picking up the starfish one by one and throwing them back into the ocean. "What are you doing that for, old man?" asked the boy. "What possible difference can it make?" The old man looked at the boy for a moment, thought, leaned over, picked up another starfish, and threw it back into the ocean. "Made a difference to that one," he said. I leave you with what I hope is a very simple and achievable wish for all of you. And that is that as you go through your life and as your career, you find a starfish or two. Thank you.